they're led to believe that the government is saving these children, in part because it operates under the, quote, facade of benevolence. That statement and the chapter more broadly is chapter 1 she just opened up a broader line of thinking that prompted me to question how language and naming and public narrative shape our assumptions about systems like child welfare or health care, right? It's called the child welfare system, so it must be for children's welfare, right? But language does more than describe. It serves a political function. It operates as a kind of moral shield, making it difficult to see these systems as capable of harm or to hold them accountable when harm occurs. It shapes perception, how we understand institutions, where we place our trust, and what we allow ourselves to question. So with that, it is my honor to introduce Professor Dorothy Roberts.
Woo, I got a fan section up in here from Milwaukee. Thank you. Thanks, Hafiza. And thanks to everybody who's here today, all the speakers, all the people who came together, Phoebe and others, to put this conference together. It's just been so exciting so far, the spirit in the room, and seeing some of my students here, thank you for coming, is just fantastic. Okay, I'll stop naming people because every single talk today has been just amazing and inspiring. So on the same day in March, at the end of March, as I was thinking about what to say in this keynote, I happened to read 2 articles about the abysmal state of the care industry in this country. The headline of the first one in the Washington Post read, "Scores of childcare centers at risk after Trump officials gut federal office." And the story related to families with children enrolled in the childcare centers in federal buildings. Well, the General Services Administration, which is the federal government's real estate arm, just summarily decided one day to abolish the office. Just like that, one day last month, firing all but one of the employees who was then transferred to a different division. So by eliminating the office that runs these childcare centers, and the network of childcare for federal workers, it left the centers vulnerable, obviously, to a drop in quality, to higher costs, and to outright closure. This seems to be something this administration is doing. It just closes an office, which means that the people who are supposed to get the services and the money that the office distributed just won't get it. I saw the other day a little tiny article. I thought, oh, sorry. I thought this should have been front page news. It was a little tiny article, and it said that HHS had just closed down the office that provides heat and air conditioning assistance to families. Just closed it. So now that money can't go to the families that need it because there's no one to distribute the money, which has been appropriated by Congress. What is the point of that but just cruelty? Just cruelty and inhumanity. Okay, the second article, which was in Mother Jones, was headlined, "RFK Jr. Moves to Close Administration for Community Living." And the story reported that the federal government, the Department of Health and Human Services that RFK Jr. now runs, moved to eliminate the Administration for Community Living, which is a subsidiary that was established in 2012 to support disabled and aging people as part of their broader cuts of 10,000 HHS staff. So according to the Post, the shutdown will mean, quote, more people forced into institutional settings. So there's always been and will always be a crisis of care in a society that's ruled by patriarchal racial capitalism. This isn't anything new. In such a society as ours and around the world, its primary overriding objective is to maximize capital accumulation for a powerful white male elite. And there's 2 billionaires that seem to be running the show now, exploiting the labor of those who provide the care that society relies on. Care is the oldest, most enduring issue for humanity because everyone needs care. Every single human being needs care. And as Selma said this morning, this subject is so valuable. I loved when she said that. There's so much value in care. It's the most valuable thing, isn't it? So it's always a timely issue. It's always a local issue, and it's always a global issue. It's woven in every single policy, whether it's a policy that's shaped by a cruel, inhumane, divisive, carceral logic, or one that builds a humane, free, and democratic society. But the care crisis has intensified under the current administration. And one thing about that, if we could look for a silver lining, is it's so plain to see that there's a care crisis. You can't possibly ignore it anymore. And I think that's exactly why the struggle that so many of us have been involved in, some of us for decades, where income and respect and other material resources required to meet everyone's need for care, and to compensate those who care for them, yes, including wages for housework, it's more urgent today than ever. And I think that gives us an opportunity to step up our organizing, to call in more people who never realized the crisis before, were able to ignore it, who can't possibly ignore it now. So I want to make 3 brief points about our right to care that I hope ties together some of the key themes we've already heard this morning coming out of our conversations. And those 3 are: privatization comes with punishment, profiting from care divides us, and care ties us together. I thought that was so beautiful. Caregivers and those they're caring for coming together, talking about their relationships, their experiences, and how caring for others and needing care, which we all need, can be such a strong basis of bringing us together. So let me start with privatization comes with punishment. I think this is something that came out on both of the panels this morning. The privatized care industry profits off of our need for care and to care for others. It relies on market solutions to meet care needs and increasingly absolves the state of any responsibility to support children, families, and communities. What public institutions remain, and they've been decimated by welfare restructuring and neoliberalism and the rise of the care industry, they're increasingly privatized. Even state institutions are run now by for-profit companies, transferring their operations, what were public operations, to private companies. Some are for-profit, some are nonprofit. But what they're interested in is maximizing their revenues. I think, who was it Premila, you mentioned Maximus? Yes, its business is to maximize revenues. That's its business. That's how it makes money. And so-called child welfare agencies around the country are entering into multi-million-dollar contracts with Maximus to maximize their revenues. Where are their revenues coming from? From taking children away from their families. I'm not making this up. Maximus helps them find the children that are receiving benefits from the government, Social Security benefits, because their parents have died or they have disabilities, to target them, to take away and put in the system, because they'll bring more benefits that then the state says, we now are your caregiver, the state, so we're going to take these benefits, and then the children age out of foster care. They should have had thousands and thousands of dollars of benefits, and they have nothing. Some of them are houseless, incarcerated, nothing, because the state not only took them from their families, but stole their money from them. So, as Pamela also explained, capitalism benefits off the crisis of care. Now, privatization, though, and capitalism itself doesn't just entail state abandonment, forcing people onto the market. It also necessarily entails blame, coercion, and punishment for all the people that can't make it on the market because of structural inequalities, because they are structured to be impoverished, because they're structured to live in segregated, disinvested Black communities, because they're structured to live on Native reservations that have been with land stolen and resources stolen by the government, all these structural ways that they cannot make it in the care industry. Either they have low wages or they can't afford care. They're then blamed for not being able to succeed. One of my favorite quotes from Malcolm X is something like this. I didn't write it down, so I'm going from memory, but it describes what I'm talking about. He says, "I have no sympathy for a society that crushes people and then punishes them for not being able to stand up under the weight." And that's exactly what a racial, patriarchal, capitalist society does. So privatization and punishment are two sides of the same coin. They have to go together. They have to go together. So as the government expects people to rely on the private care industry and other market-based ways of meeting human needs, what happens to the people who just can't make it, who can't afford it? Well, there's an entire prison and foster industrial complex waiting for them. That's why those industries exist, those punitive industries, for those people that can't get enough income and care off of the care industry. The hundreds of billions of money. Just this morning, I read that this administration wants $45 billion more to build detention camps for immigrants. Okay, so all that money, the $30 billion, there was a statistic about the amount of money. I think one of the sisters from Milwaukee mentioned it. I believe you were just talking about the cost of maintaining children out of their families, maybe in the state of Wisconsin, because the total federal amounts and state amounts spent on maintaining children outside their homes by the so-called child welfare system is more like $30 to $40 billion. Yes. So all that money, if we add it all up, that's spent on building prisons, ICE detention camps, foster care facilities to cage people, could be spent on direct income to caregivers. It would be far better spent on that. The money is already there. It's just being spent the wrong way. It's being spent to punish the people who are abandoned and violated by the care industry. A market-based care society always operates according to a carceral logic that criminalizes care as much as it privatizes it. People who can't afford privatized care because of structural inequities are stigmatized, blamed, coerced, and punished for seeking government aid. The state provides care to some people only after they're charged, prosecuted, and incarcerated for crimes. That's where some people in our society can find food, and housing. I mean, you don't even want to call it care. It's not real care. But what's needed to meet their human needs, this society says the only way you're going to get it is after we institutionalize you. That's why it just pains me when I see these people that are defending the family policing system and they find some children who grew up in foster care who they can manipulate to stay. Well, anyway, they can get to say that they liked foster care or it helped them in some way. And usually if you ask them, it's somebody who was not hired by the state. They found somebody who helped them. It wasn't the caseworker, but it's almost as if they're saying the only way I could get the state to provide anything for the people who cared for me is to put me in foster care. To me, it's a condemnation. It's a condemnation of our society and the way we treat. Yeah. For those people who have to be arrested and incarcerated and institutionalized before they can get care, their care is framed not as, obviously, it's not a voluntary help to them. As my dear friend and comrade Joyce McMillan, who founded JMAC for Families in New York City, says, it's not really care, it's not really a service if you have to be forced to get it, right? If you're mandated to get it, how is that real care? So the care for them is framed as a mandated so-called service that they must accept as a condition of probation or parole or getting their children back. In a book called Prosecuting Poverty, Criminalizing Care, Wendy Bach writes about how Tennessee legislators justified their fetal assault law. This is a law that says if you do anything to risk a fetus, you can be prosecuted for a crime. They created this crime of fetal assault. And it's been targeted at pregnant opioid-using women in the state. And they justify it by saying this is how these women are going to get drug treatment. Okay, so you have to get drug treatment. You have to be prosecuted for fetal assault. And the law, of course, was built on precedent set by hundreds and hundreds of prosecutions of Black women in the late 1980s and 1990s for being pregnant and smoking crack cocaine. Once they turned the problem for some people it's not a problem, but the problem of using drugs while pregnant into a crime, they were able to do that because of the racism against Black women. No, once they did that, now it can be used against anybody who's pregnant and is deemed to be risking the fetus, okay? So the state turns a drug problem into a crime when a social welfare approach would have worked far better. Social welfare programs then are designed to make participants feel like criminals, like when welfare recipients are fingerprinted. They're made to undergo random drug tests. They're constantly monitored for fraud. And I learned today from Virginia Eubanks about geofencing. They're surrounded by an invisible dog fence for humans. All this electronic monitoring and digital surveillance, that's the price of getting care. That's the price of getting care. Families that are struggling to care for their children are the chief targets of the so-called child welfare system, which many of us are calling more accurately a family policing system. The family policing system punishes caregivers who fail to provide their children's needs, and they punish them by taking their children away or perceive to not provide their children's needs. Someone said they take children for whatever reason they want to. And in the United States, it's disproportionately Black and Native families, as it has been since the time of settler colonialism and slavery. Those are the families that the US government has separated from the very beginning, and they continue to be. This is not an accident. The same families most at risk of being separated. Half of Black children in America will be subjected to a child welfare investigation before they reach age 18. Half of Black children. This is the norm of the government's relationship to Black families. The privatized foster industrial complex profits from maintaining children away from their families and stealing their benefits, as I mentioned before, and it doesn't offer any real support to parents. It doesn't provide the material resources, the income that parents need. It doesn't provide housing, food, medical care, and clothing. It punishes mothers for not providing those things to their children because they can't afford it. And what's the solution? Not providing it. No, it's terroristic intervention into their families, regulation, surveillance, all facilitated, and of course, taking their children, all facilitated by a vast network of mandated reporters, people trained like teachers and doctors and nurses and therapists, trained supposedly to provide care, but instead they're told, don't provide the care, turn them out, take the kids, turn them over to the family policing system. How insulting. How insulting. Why would you bow to that? And don't tell me the law makes you do it, because guess what? They don't do it to wealthy white families. So the law, no matter what problems are going on in those families, they don't take their children away. And don't tell me that wealthy white people don't use drugs, don't drink alcohol, don't have children with problems. Come on, we all know that they do. Did you watch White Lotus or what? Okay. They were taking drugs. Those parents were taking drugs constantly. Do you think they felt, it wasn't even on their radar that a child welfare worker would come in and take their children from them? Okay. So it's baloney. I'm not going to curse, but it's baloney, right? Okay. As Joanne Perez cited this morning, the children stolen from their homes are put in a foster system that is documented to be dangerous, to abuse them physically, sexually, emotionally. And as Virginia Eubanks pointed out, even in kinship care, when they're given to kin, what is the price? I don't understand why, in order for grandma, auntie to take care of the children, they can't just get the money to do it. The children have to become wards of the state, which means at any moment, and I have known so many mothers where this has happened, any moment they can pull up, a caseworker and a police officer can pull up and say, oh, guess what? We decided you don't have enough rooms in your house. You don't have enough dressers in your house. We don't like the way that you're raising these children, and just take them away from you. So even kinship care, you're geo-fenced, you're electronically monitored, and you are at risk of your children being taken at any moment. That design of accusing, investigating, surveilling, regulating, traumatizing, separating, that is the official response to children's unmet needs, and that is antithetical to care. It's the opposite of care, both because of how it harms the children and their caregivers, but also because it tells the public, we're taking care of children, don't worry about it. We don't need wages for housework. We don't need to compensate caregivers. We don't need to have a society that ensures that all children have their needs met, because we have a system that is punishing people who don't meet children's needs. And so it takes a place of the social change that we need. All right, let me move on. I had a little more history to tell, but I'm going to move on. No, we have to Oh, you're so sweet, but we have 2 more panels coming up, or maybe it's 3, I'm not sure. Okay, well, I'll sum up my little history lesson by saying that we can see a direct connection between Black mothers after the welfare rights movement finally getting some piddly, stipends and welfare benefits for taking care of children. Immediately, there was a white supremacist backlash against it. We saw the amounts of welfare effectively going down, welfare stigmatized, the mothers called welfare queens who had babies just to get a welfare check. We saw basically behavior modification. If you want your checks, you got to do this, that, and the other. Pushing mothers into low-wage work, telling them they shouldn't be having babies, telling them they needed to get married as the answer to female poverty, and the explosion of the foster care system. Before Black mothers got welfare, their children were ignored by the child welfare system. Right? Yes, ignored. As soon as they got welfare rights, what happens? The foster care system explodes. Hundreds of thousands of children, and Black children by 2000 were the largest group of children in foster care, although they were a tiny minority, really 13 or 15%. Largest group, 4 times as likely as white children to be taken from their families. So I just, again, want to make this point that the idea that we don't deserve income to care for our children is tightly connected ideologically and historically and politically to the punishment of people who are unable to meet the needs of their children in the market. And those are always the most marginalized people in society, the most marginalized people. And guess what? They can weaponize, they weaponized it, literally weapon, as Bonita Lawrence was talking about, a weapon of war against Native people that continued with the 60s scoop. And I think it's so interesting that they were taking Black children then in the United States at that same time, starting in the 60s, and you can see the skyrocketing of the foster population at that time. So these are connected, again, ideologically, politically, historically. Don't tell me, as some of the defenders of the system do, that there's no racism in the system, because this is just because Black children have greater unmet needs that the system is providing. I swear to you, that's what they say. There's a whole group of them, these child welfare workers. Okay, so profiting from care divides us. I once wrote an article called Spiritual and Menial Housework. So Preble is smiling. I love that little gem of an article, because what I wrote about there is that there's this split among women who care for children and do housework. It's a racialized and class-based split. White, especially white affluent mothers who work in the home, are seen as spiritual. They are providing this valuable care to their children. And then there's menial housework. And that's the housework done by paid caregivers who aren't paid enough to come into their homes and do the hard work of cleaning, wiping kids' butts and noses, and doing this work that is considered beneath the affluent white women. But when women of color do it, and they do more, so the moments that the affluent white woman spends with her children when she comes home from work, precious and valuable. But all the work the Jamaican nanny did all day long with those kids, underpaid, not devalued. And what about her kids? What about her kids? Well, she's not considered a suitable mother for her own kids. who knows what's happening with her kids? But the point is, who cares? Nobody cares. The government doesn't care. When I say nobody cares, of course we care, but the government doesn't care. They're targeting her to take her kids away from her. But my point about how this divides us is that it undervalues or devalues the work of all women. That affluent white woman isn't getting paid for her spiritual housework at all. She's not getting any money for it. And it also devalues not just the work of paid caregivers who are disproportionately women of color, low income, but it also devalues the resistance, the long history of resistance of Black women against this kind of labor exploitation, and as Selma mentioned, like Johnny Tillman, in favor of wages for housework, compensation for people's work in the home, reproductive justice. Who's been at the forefront of those struggles? Black grassroots organizing by Black women. And so it devalues their resistance. I don't want to leave that out. The resistance that, like, who are the women that consistently vote against presidents and policies that exploit labor? Look at Black women. Look at the last election. You always count on Black women to do the right thing when it comes to politics. So we have to stop devaluing the contributions of Black women to care work, but also to advocating for a more caring society. Now, as I mentioned, even affluent white women bear a terrible cost if they support this hierarchy of care, and unfortunately, too many do. Not enough. Affluent white women are willing to get rid of this split, which is harming them as well. And rather than increase the value of white women's domestic labor, the spiritual menial split works to depress the value of all women's housework and caregiving, of anyone who does care work in the home or on the labor market. As Pilar explained this morning, they both experience unjust care penalties. Everyone doing care work experiences these unjust penalties. They lose income because they're doing care work. Most families are harmed to varying degrees. Some are harmed more than others, but most are harmed, except for this tiny little elite that's running things. Everyone else is harmed by a care industry that relies on market-supplied services for the socially privileged and terror and punishment for the socially disadvantaged. Now, what if instead of allowing this tiny sliver of elites that are profiting off of our care labor, they're profiting off of children taken from their homes, that are profiting from a care industry that profits without compensating people, either not compensating them all or compensating them too stingily. What if instead of allowing that to divide us, we adopted the motto of this conference: family caregivers and people who depend on care versus the care industry, versus the care industry. What if we were willing to reject the punitive approaches to care and recognize the human right of all of us to care and to be compensated for the care work that we do? There are so many more of us than there are from the people who are profiting off of us. Care ties us together. That's my third point. The care industry divides us, but care ties us together. We can imagine a world where it would be unimaginable to say you're caring for people by caging them and tearing their families apart. Let me just briefly give one concrete example of how coming together to care for each other can fight against the care industry. Anna Ahrens, a law professor, wrote a little article on the unintentional abolition of the child welfare system in New York. And she was talking about the period where New York City was locked down because of the COVID epidemic. At that time, the child welfare system there, ACS, basically shut down because caseworkers weren't going into people's homes, knocking on the door, investigating families, and judges weren't tearing families apart at the same rates they were before. And despite the fact that everyone's predicting, oh my goodness, during the lockdown, if these terrible families aren't being investigated, we're gonna have all these fatalities all over the city, and these mothers, terrible mothers with their kids at home, they're gonna be killing them, and all of these predictions, none of that happened. There was absolutely no increase in child abuse during that period. And why? Professor Aaron said for two reasons. Families were getting checks in the mail. Of course, that policy was stopped by Congress as soon as the lockdown period ended, but for this miraculously, contrary to general US policy, the federal government was writing checks and people were literally getting income. And we know, surprise, surprise, that helped to reduce child poverty in America, right? And then it went back up as soon as they stopped writing the checks. So that was one thing. The other important thing is grassroots mutual aid organizations that have been organizing in New York City sprang into action and began to distribute community-based resources to families. So the combination of income directly in the hands of family caregivers and community-based mutual aid is what protected these families and helped children to thrive, even through a terrible epidemic, far more, drastically better than taking children from their homes. There's not even a comparison. So collectively, we can create a world with a radically different approach to care, one that's humane, equitable, and just. And it's my hope that this conference and the conversations we're having here will make a really meaningful contribution to that vision of care, to our right to care. And as others have said, we can win in building a caring society, a society that we would want to live in. So thank you so much. Thanks.